I am the digital executive. I'm the digital media executive of Edvantage India. Um, I'm more than happy to welcome Mr. Abhishek Goswami as our guest for the evening. Before I say anything, I'm delighted and honored to have him as my guest for today. So, you must be all knowing the topic for the podcast, and we only know about drilling, reservoirs, production as petroleum engineers. Geophysics is that subject which even today only a few people are aware of. So application of geophysical methods and technique is not just limited to hydrocarbon exploration and exploitation, but it's also applicable in many other areas such as groundwater exploration, mineral exploration, civil and geotechnical engineering. Even in the field of agriculture and archaeology, certain geophysical applications have a big role to play. And that is one of the reasons why we have this podcast for today. And I'll just introduce our guest in very brief, and then we'll just start away with the session without any further ado. So, with more than 2 decades of experience as a geophysicist, Sir is currently involved in creating business strategies and providing project management expertise in Shell UK. In the past, he has worked in recognized brands, including Enquest PLC, Talisman Energy UK Limited, Schlumberger, and Reliance. And his area of expertise consists working through the life cycle of oil and gas fields from exploration to decommissioning, devising turnaround strategies for declining fields, among others. So it's really great to have you in here, sir. And now you may continue.
Yeah, you said a brief introduction and you've given quite a lot actually. So I don't have much to add as far as the introduction is concerned, apart from the fact that I graduated from Indian School of Mines in Dhanbad back in the year when the millennium bug was still on. So that would give you an idea of my age and how old I am. So yes, after graduating with geophysics, I started with Reliance in Mumbai. It was a very exciting place at that point to work for because the new exploration licensing policy, the first one, was just awarded a year before that with 12 licenses to Reliance. And this was the first foray of private exploration in India. So there was a lot of enthusiasm, and I joined during that time to the industry as a seismic interpreter. Then I was sent out to seismic boats to acquire data. After a couple of years, I moved to a service company called Schlumberger, which you must have heard of, the ones in the oil and gas industry. So I became a seismic data processor, traveled a few parts of the world in the Middle East, here in UK, and then back to Mumbai. So I came back to Mumbai in 2004 and then again moved back to the UK, now this time as a seismic interpreter and set base in Aberdeen. And I thought, yeah, I'll stay put for about 5 years. And that was, what, 15 years ago? So here I am. So that's in a nutshell me as a working professional. Apart from that, I'm a cricket tragic like most of us are. I live in Scotland, so I'm a keen hill walker. I try every excuse to venture out and practice my very basic skills of hill walking. But that passion is currently on cold storage because come weekend, it's usually dad's taxi duties with the children. So there's no free time. That's me. Shivangi, over to you.
Great. We also come to know that you're engaged with several charities and several non-governmental organizations.
Yeah, try to do my bit, keeps us occupied, especially during the pandemic.
Exactly. That's great to hear. So, you told us about your journey in the oil and gas industry. We would like to begin with asking just a brief explanation of geophysics and its applicability in the industries to the audience that we have.
To do that, let me take a step back. just to provide context, the, the historical development of this subject of geophysics has essentially been motivated by two factors. One is the research of what's happening in planet Earth, its events and its problem. The second is economical usage of Earth's resources. What do I mean by resources? Ore deposits, petroleum, water resources, etc. So while the former is dedicated to Earth related hazards like earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, tides, and floods, etc., the latter is where we come to the industrial application. So, again, broad classification, exploration and exploitation. So, it is oil and gas, mineral, and the mining industry, and definitely groundwater as an industry as well. So, that's the exploration part of it. And then the other part, which is seldom understood unless you are in the discipline, is the engineering and the environmental science part of it, where subjects like geotechnical engineering, soil science, anything and everything that is needed for urban township building needs geophysics. And there's a huge area in geographical information system, or GIS as we call it, which has huge applications. So this is how I would categorize the role of geophysics in the traditional sector over the last 50 to 70 years. Hope that answers your question.
Um, so, how has geophysics been emerging? Like when we talk of the frontiers, how has it evolved over the years, and what does the landscape look like for the years to come for geophysics?
Right. Okay. So the first part of your question is something which I would like to answer by saying is geophysics is that branch of geology, which is the mother subject, which pushes the envelope by saying that you can take the recourse of physics or physical phenomena to understand essentially what's beneath the earth better. So, in other words, if I have a confined space where something is there, some kind of prize to be had, it could be petroleum, mineral, whatever, you don't need to drill hundreds of wells to get that. You can do something smart to find out where exactly to drill, what is your optimized location, and then do your extraction so that you get the most out of it. So it is that concept of working smart that is what geophysics has done over the years. Now let me come to the second part of the question, which is really a good one. I will start with something that occupies a lot of my time these days and keeps me awake when I think of how, I won't just say geophysics, but geoscience, because the lines get blurred here. How can geoscience help unlock its potential, particularly in area of carbon capture and storage? Because we will revisit this hopefully during the talk quite a few times. We know that we live in a world where everyone's conscious about decarbonization. Now, decarbonization in oil and gas is one thing, we can just talk about it, but there is also decarbonization of parts of the sector like heavy industries, surface transportation. In countries like India, we use ACs a lot, so cooling. In countries like UK, we use heating a lot. So the heating, air travel. So these sectors are very hard to decarbonize with, the usual means of decarbonization that we think of, which is electricity. Oh, we will have some solar, we will have some wind farms, and we will produce electricity, and that'll be done. Unfortunately, heavy industries do not work that way. So we will continue to use oil and gas for those, but oil and gas will produce CO2. So the need to decarbonize, so take the CO2 out of that, is especially acute in industrial hubs, and we need to capture emissions, transport them, and then store them in safe and secure sites. That brings me to the core of my answer. Sedimentary basins represents obvious storage opportunities through the use of, what do we have? We have depleted oil and gas fields. We have huge saline aquifers where either the oil and gas never migrated or they were never there. So these represent perfect storage places. There is no need to test storage sites. Oh, sorry. Let me rephrase. We still have to test these storage sites. Since poor choices, what would they do? They will undermine confidence that you start pushing carbon dioxide in and they may escape. So, this is where technical methods of data acquisition, processing, interpretation through seismic methods, petrophysics, looking at cores and describing them, they are all from the oil and gas sector. And I see a lot of these skills easily moving over or transferring over, and that makes us really well aligned with energy transition. So to answer your question, what does the landscape of geophysics looks like? I think in the short term, CCS or carbon capture and storage is one of the key areas where our skill sets are easily transferable, and I see that happening.
Okay, so you basically elaborated upon the skill set that's easily applicable in the area.
Indeed. And if I may just add a few more points, I know I only mentioned CCS, but some of the other things that you guys or the people in the audience may be associated with, I can also touch upon some of them because it's a long list. And in each case, geophysics or geoscience has a role to play. For example, think about solar. I know solar is now becoming really big in India, even though it's still a marginal player, but it is meant to become quite big in the next 5 years. For solar, you still need to do exploration of the site. What site is best conducive for solar? So you need to make resource map. Now, to develop a slow solar plant, you have to do surface terrain mapping so that the optimum use of sunlight and retention is ensured. Geothermal. I know geothermal is not very well understood at many places, but where it is, the earth is a great source for heat. How can we tap the potential of the earth and generate heat to make electricity? Now, that is another subject which comes out of geosciences and a lot of transferable skills. Ditto for wind. And for wind, I will mainly focus on offshore wind. It's still, for these wind farms to be installed, you need to map the seabed. You need to understand how sustainable it is. So, the surface mapping aspect of solar is also applicable for wind. Last but not the least, all the things that we think of as soon as we think about a green future, like your electric car. Imagine the minerals that are needed, the rare earth minerals that are needed to create a photovoltaic cell. Where is that mineral going to come from? Currently, the extraction of these minerals will have to go 10 to 40 fold up to sustain a global fleet of cars changing from diesel and petrol into electric. So that needs to be explored as well and supply lines established. So that will also need geoscience. So to conclude, while the energy industry has faced significant headwinds in the last few years, it is now moving faster towards new, cleaner energy production in different parts of the world. Some parts it's moving faster, some parts slightly slower. So strong, flexible technical skills, which are in demand in oil and gas, will continue to be in demand during the time of the transition. That's my feeling.
So, as you said, that we are moving towards the transition period. Now, there must be certain challenges also that you perceive that we can come across in the longer run when it comes to geophysics. So, would you like to elaborate upon them?
Yes. Again, I will just focus on two key things that I find a common trend everywhere I have these interactions outside of the industry, because the industry is so inert. 90% of the time you meet people like you, so we become so biased and tunnel visioned that what I'm going to say just now seldom occurs till you actually interact with people who are not in the industry, or most importantly when you are interacting with students. What are they? Firstly, the biggest blocker is the negative perception that a career in geoscience aligns with dirty exploitation and extractive industries that has presented us with global carbon problem in the first place. That perception element of it. Then equally at guilt, I would say, is the other side, which is us. So it's a collective failure to paint the picture that shows the important role geoscience has in creating the solutions that tackle and reduce emissions. We live in a day and age, without getting too much into politics and what do you call controversial things, I would say, things like the woke culture. Suddenly, everyone takes very strong exceptions of a statement here or a comment there. We are also increasingly finding that everything almost has to be in binary. Either this is good or this is bad. Now, if only the world lived in a binary, it would be so much easy for us to take decisions. And unfortunately, it isn't. So, more such interaction could only help overcome some of these challenges. Because if we hasten to form an opinion without getting all the facts sorted, the loser, everyone will be a loser. The subject will be a loser. It won't get the bright talents it needs. The talents would also be losers because they won't find more about the subject. They will just have one perception.
So if the perception tends to change, there are more opportunities for people as well.
Absolutely. So that is why the second point is
Second.
actually more important than the first point. That the
Hmm.
people who are in it, as long as they have credibility, they are the ones who have to be the champions of change.
Change, channeling the perception in the right direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so now I would change it to a national perspective and ask that how investing in geophysics as a subject for a country, for an economy like India, be beneficial? And does it require any modification in the curriculum that we already have?
It's a very pertinent question because, again, if we go back in history and say, when did universities start teaching geophysics? We will go back in time to see back in the end of the 1940s and early 50s with the newly independent country, when the Oil and Natural Gas Commission, the previous incarnate of ONGC, the corporation, was set up. And one of the things that they found out was, in particularly in the US, a hybrid subject of physics and geology was actually being used quite a lot to drill wells in West Texas. The nation builder said we need to create a college that caters to the demands of the Natural Oil and Natural Gas Commission. So in Dhanbad, which was initially a school for mining and geology, a new subject was created, geophysics. That's how geophysics came into being. Later, the IITs started, and back after the noughties, some of the other universities in Dehradun and Ahmedabad, they also started it. That was the historical context. I am afraid to say we have outlived that historical context. The curriculum that caters, yeah, it starts with a little bit of this and that, but then in no time moves towards oil and gas exploration. And most of us come out as one trick ponies. How do we change that? Let me propose a few things. I've already started talking about it in my previous answer. So, highlight that geophysics is a science with a broad range of applications and career paths. Incorporate sustainable development and environmental stewardship into geoscience curricula. It is not only about exploration and exploitation. That perception needs uh, to be broken. These are broad words. Let me get down to something which are more tangible. I would say encourage participation of students in geophysical aspects of community driven projects. There are a lot of community driven projects that happen that require geophysics. I mean, endless arsenic problem in groundwater contamination. A lot of work goes on which needs geophysical profiling. Let's get the universities involved in that. Let people see that the geoscience graduates are not training just to go and work in ONGC, Oil India, and Reliance. Even though they are some of the biggest absorbents. So uh, to me, it is about bringing the students and the community closer with the subject acting as a bridge that needs to happen. Now, your question about change in curriculum, I am not 100%, up to speed with what the curriculum looks like as of now across all the universities. I have some sketchy knowledge, and I'm sure the students here will correct me when I say that um, machine learning is still taught as a separate subject. I do not think as a core part of geophysics something like machine learning is taught. People do it out of their interest. Computing is certainly taught, but AI as an integral part of geophysics isn't, and which I think is a massive, missing the woods for the trees. Machine learning should be applied to scientific problem where there exists an underlying but unknown relationship between input data and desired output. That's how I simplify machine learning. Now, there is no known physical model to describe the relationship, or the physical model requires too many unrealistic assumptions and approximations. That is why you need to build the understanding of data and competence in machine learning right from your graduation and post graduation days. Too many of the time, either people who are studying data sciences are doing it in absolute, the core area, not knowing much about the application, coming to the application later, or they are doing application science like geophysics and trying to learn data sciences further down the line. That marriage needs to happen early. So that would be one of the first things I would suggest, a change in the curriculum if it's not in place already.
Yeah, it's on place. Like I come from UPS. I did it in mining. We had in the in the fourth semester, we had geophysics subject, and AI was an optional subject. It was not a part of it. So yeah, you're completely bang on when it comes to that. So that is a problem that means the curriculum as well. Now, you're currently in a position that's related to technical data and information management. So, how do you see this area evolve and support new opportunities that right now a student needs to be aware of, who's probably interested in geophysics and wants to explore the opportunities that subject has?
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, Again, before we do the crystal ball gazing and talk about the future, let's first establish what it does right now. So, technical data, the relevance of it in the larger scheme of things is the first thing that comes to my mind is safety. In oil and gas, we are all used to seeing these huge disasters. Macondo, to start with, because that should be fresh in all of your mind. We can go as far as back to Piper Alpha, which was a North Sea disaster. You see these massive rigs burning. ONGC has had a few of its share in the recent years. What we do not realize is this is an extremely hazardous business we are in. And for each failure which has catastrophic human life consequences, there are hundreds and thousands of wells that are being drilled every year with, I won't say absolute zero casualty or no man hours lost, but certainly without catastrophe. So a lot of good work is going on. What is driving that good work? That good work is based on good decisions being made. What drives good decision? Good data. Good data, timely presented, helps enable good decision. It is not somebody scratching their head and say, let's do B instead of A because my experience tells me so. That's not how it works. It is essentially data driven. So that is the first thing about safety and emergency in the world that we operate. The next is we churn out a lot of data in the oil and gas industry to the extent that we were one of the primary adopters of supercomputer back in the 1950s and 60s in the US. The problem of generating a lot of data is how do we manage it? How do we safeguard vital information and preserve it? There's a word we use in the industry called corporate memory. Just think about your room. If you don't take care of it for months, what does it look like? And then I ask you to find something in that room. That versus, you keep a clean and tidy room, how much time does it take you to do? So that is the analogy I draw about a systematic and proper structured way of retaining data. That's another key thing that we do. Uh, these things lead us to something that we call improvement in efficiency, productivity, and reducing operating costs. Because a business drives on profitability, you either increase the rate of return by increasing cash flow or you reduce the operating cost. Best situation is you do both, other situation is you do one or the other. So we come from a world where we reduce the OPEX. Last but not the least, what do? We make sure that, just like India has DGH, the Directorate General of Hydrocarbon, the referee body in oil and gas. UK also has OGA, the Oil and Gas Authority. Their role is to make sure we stay compliant and we provide the key data that is to be shared with them from time to time. Technical data and information management is the custodian of that data, of that relationship, basically. So making sure the company is not penalized for not providing data at the right time. So emergency, corporate memory, improving efficiency, and regulatory compliance. These are the four areas in which we are held responsible. So anybody wanting to move to this part of the business, doesn't matter where in the world, will have to bear these things in mind. These will be written in your job descriptions. Now, coming back to the key part of your question about what does the future look like? As we all know, digitalization is all pervasive. It is there everywhere. And especially if you are working with data and data management and governance, you cannot escape digitalization. We talk about CO2 storage right now. If tomorrow somebody asks me that, okay, I have a location which is 10 by 10 kilometers block, tell me whether this is a good CO2 store to go and, store carbon dioxide for the next 25 years. And tell me within the next 10 to 15 days. I can do it only when all the critical data needed to make that assessment is in place. If I go and say, sorry, I can only tell you after I get all my data, and that will take me 3 months, then the opportunity cost is lost. You have lost vital time getting your ducks in line. So that is where digitalization plays a huge role for us to get ready for energy transition. What In our day-to-day lives do I see as I speak to you? We are using dashboards, using Power BI more and more. We are not looking at mega spreadsheets to find relationships. That's difficult. Nobody has time. Instead, we are using Power BI. We are also seeing a massive migration of traditional data saved in hard disks to cloud. The applications that we use to interact with data are also becoming cloud based applications. So the migration to cloud and reporting using dashboards are some of the big things that I see in the future. So let me conclude on this question by saying that while all these changes are happening, the search for talent is always on. It is never ending. Some skills will adapt and thrive, while others will make way for new skills. The challenge is on you, me, and all of us. What do we do?
So, as a student, we should, apart from technicality, we should now be also focusing equally on digitalization and cloud data and Power BI. Computing should be an important aspect. That's what I get out of the answer, and I'm sure everybody else does.
Absolutely.
This
Absolutely.
was about the students. Now, when I come to the experienced individuals who are already working in the petroleum sector, you know, number one, it's a risky job. Number two, switching domains in the petroleum sector is extremely difficult because keeping the jobs is challenging. So, what should one do to prepare a career in renewables?
Okay. First and foremost, with due respect, I agree to you to an extent, but not entirely. Why? Because as I am here sitting in front of you, I'll cite my own example. Yes, I work in the oil and gas industry, but in oil and gas, I have moved roles, not just organizations, but actually roles. As you said in my introduction, right from exploring in areas where we don't know the hydrocarbon potential of a place to development, leading all the way to the end of life, decommissioning. That is, plugging your holes with cement and giving the asset back to the regulator. That's it. Its life has come to an end. This is the entire production cycle of oil and gas, the full cycle. And I have always worked in some part or the other which require completely different skills. And if this wasn't enough, if this was still the no, you're not too really different. In the pandemic, I moved roles. So I became from 20 odd years working as a geophysicist, working with subsurface models, developing it, drilling wells. I suddenly moved to the data side of things, which is not just geophysics. It is any, you think of drilling data, production data, reservoir pressures, you think of any data that is equally important to me and the team that I work with to maintain. What am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that yes, change is always difficult, but change is also that catalyst that puts the mirror in front of your face and say, are you curious? Are you adaptable? And thirdly, how good is your self management? So thriving in change needs these three qualities in my mind. The day I achieve, oh, I've had 20 years now. I need another 10 to 15 years. I want to do the same job that I'm doing today for the next 15 years. I know that I have hit the first nail in my coffin. So, at the end of the day, I would strongly say that if you do not have enough information about oil and gas, energy transition, renewable, whatever name you give it, This is the time to absorb, get as much information as possible, because through these information, through working on this, questioning somebody on a forum, answering it, reading a paper here, dialing into a session like this, you slowly, like a sponge, soak in information and then start articulating your passion. As soon as you start articulating your passion, a very interesting thing happens. You find out where you are today. You have identified your passion, which is like your destination. So guess what is there between your destination and where you are? It is called the gap. Then you start saying that, okay, I want to be in that place. I want to be a GIS analyst who looks for, I don't know, surface outcrop of certain kind, which is going to help set up a solar farm. Now I have only had one paper of GIS in my this thing. What do I do? I'm in my final year. I should start with my dissertation on GIS and maybe look at an application area. So let me frame a problem that I'm going to work on. Then I'm going to look for potential employers. So this is how you articulate steps on how you're going to get there. Even if you are working in oil and gas. So going back to your question that, somebody who has already played his or her cards, I am in an industry, can I change? The answer is yes, you can. Make sure you choose your mentors appropriately, because at every stage in life, mentoring is important. Mentoring is not coaching. A lot of people fail to distinguish between the acts of coaching and the act of mentoring, including mentors. Mentors quickly start going into let me show you how to do it mode. That's coaching. Choose your mentors appropriately. Remember your ability and your willingness to continue developing throughout your working life. Now, with 0, 1, 2, 5 years of experience, all the way to 20, 30, that will keep you motivated and that will define you ultimately. So, yeah, now I hope you understand why I slightly differ from,
Yeah,
you that you put in your question.
I do. I do. Um, we have certain questions from the audience. I think we shall take it. Nikhil Ranjan is asking, what are the crucial areas, burning issues in computational theoretical energy-based research in the current times?
Um, Look, that's overarching one, and I can give you some specifics on the geoscience side of things, and maybe touch upon one which is the whole energy sector, and hopefully that would address some of Nikhil's question. So in geoscience, currently, a lot is going into automation of standard repetitive processes in geophysics, particularly around building velocity models, around identifying faults in the geology, using automation. These are some of the areas in which we are using and adopting AI. So the idea is, as an interpreter, reduce the mundane, where you would have geophysicists taking weeks to develop a model based on how they pick and how they do things. The computer is fastening that process and challenging the geophysicist to say, identify the fault. The time that I saved you, use that time to identify faults in it, or identify why it hasn't done an optimum job, and use number of iterations to improve it. So have a good training data set, and then use the extra time to do your interpretation, your thinking about, okay, now that this is the day, what is the data is telling me, how do I go and plan my best well through it? For the likes of us who have spent more time in the non AI world, we spend so much time on the mundane that by the time we come to that critical decision making time, there is somebody in our back saying, we need a location now, we need a location now. So I think that is what AI is doing in geophysics, particularly to help us understand how to do our job more efficiently. Now, let me take a more broader view in the energy sector. One of the biggest things that the energy sector needs to do in the recent term is increase energy efficiency and reduce their own emissions. Before they do anything else, before all the wind and solar business that oil and gas companies need to get onto, it is about setting your house in order first before looking at somebody else's house. And this is where we are still struggling. For example, in an oil and gas installation, if you have a compressor of some kind, now compressor has a specific duty to do. It has what engineers would understand. It has got a design envelope. It has also got a certain tolerance, and it fails at certain point. Right now, when it fails, work stops. So somebody has to go and fix it before work begins. If you look at it from a machine learning point of view, it is such an inefficient way. So, how can we use the power of analytics to understand failure criteria and actually preemptively start changing parts before they fail so that everything is done seamlessly? The production is not hampered. So, increasing energy efficiency through predictive analytics is a core area which spans multiple disciplines. I mean, geoscience has very little role to play there, which is happening and happening in a big way. Does that answer his question?
I guess yes, that's what he asked. I hope Nikhil, you got your answer. Also, though we discussed about this in the session, I guess 2 or 3 times, but again, Sujit Panda has a question,
Mhm.
which has 2 to 3 parts to it. Why GIS is less considered? Why one's career growth in GIS is very, very slow? Why there is no scope for geophysics freshers in India apart from government organizations?
Sujit, if we had all the time in the world, we will go through all of these questions with the importance and depth that they deserve. So I will try and address them, and we can have conversations further down the line over LinkedIn. Let me try and address the GIS question first. GIS is such a valuable tool that even in an oil and gas business that I am in, I am literally working with my GIS colleagues in Shell regularly on so many different aspects. You know, till 5 to 10 years ago, when we did a review of some of our failure wells, one of the key things that we always found out was the well was not positioned on Earth at the same point where it was positioned on our software. So the Cartesian coordinates of x and y transformed to longitude and latitude was not correct to 1 square meter distance. And you can imagine you're drilling a 20-inch hole. If the 20-inch hole is 5 meters away from where it is meant to be, it'll miss the target. And this is only in oil and gas. Forget oil and gas. It has such, GIS as a part of geophysics probably has one of the widest reaches across industries. The problem is the Indian context in which I graduated, and I believe to an extent it still is after 20 years, is so percolated with oil and gas that if you do not get into an ONGC or an Oil India, the lottery ticket that you bought when you enrolled in the university is worthless. You throw that lottery ticket away. So we go back to perceptions. Now, what is not a perception but a reality is money. So, yes, a salary that a ONGC will give working for NRS may not give that salary. So, if salary is the bottom line, then sorry, these are just my views, and everybody is welcome to challenge it. If salary is the bottom line, then earth science is probably not the field. There is investment banking. There are so many things which will give you a bang for buck more than earth science would. I have had a bad salary, good salary, all kinds of salary in my life. But the fact that I'm so passionate about my work, that in itself is a big salary. And as long as the basic needs are met, I am happy. But not everybody is like that. So I entirely agree that there's a discrepancy between what oil and gas pays versus what other pays. We can't solve that problem. It is an economics problem, demand versus supply. But look, what has oil and gas done? Shot itself in the foot. You guys must have graduated in the last 5 to 6 years, if I'm not mistaken. Between 2006 and 7, I know for a fact in School of Mines, and I forget which year, 2016, 17, possibly after the oil price crashed. Between that time, instead of tens of people graduating, there were hundreds, literally 70, 80 people per batch. This was the universities growing greedy. This was also students thinking, wow, we have suddenly discovered a field like, medicine or mechanical engineering. Let's all get into it and we'll all come out with fantastic jobs. We just killed the hen which was giving one golden egg at a time. The oversupply just killed the demand. And that is again, every time I speak to my friends who are in academia and in position of influence in the institutions, I say, let the demand be there. Follow the demand. Don't try to speculate the demand and have hundreds of these boys and girls investing their life's worth and then finding that the returns are not there. So, the second part of your question, Sujit, I'm sorry if there was a magic wand. I would love to get hold of it and start changing things.
I completely agree with the last point. I'm a 2021 graduate. I truly get why I entered into, you know, and why everybody does, because all of us think it's gonna yield you, a rich package and stuff like that, but it's not the case, and we realize it much down the line when things cannot be mended. Anyways, I hope Sujit got your answer, and many others did as well. So I would just wind up the session by asking my last question. I'm sure audience, if you are having, you can put it across. Um, what advice would you provide to students who want to work for a company like Shell, and how will they be able to realize their ambitions, the company's ambitions?
Excellent, excellent question to ask. Let me again start with the tangibles before I go turn philosophical. Right now, it doesn't matter whether you have just graduated or about to graduate or spend a year or two in the industry. Please review your own strengths and position yourself for a role that is being advertised. The way Shell does it is you have to go to the Shell site, create a profile for yourself, and it asks you a bunch of questions, asks you to upload a CV. You can have multiple CVs, multiple covering letters. The idea behind that is the CV and the covering letter should speak to the role. This is where most of us become lazy and make a cardinal mistake. We try to create something that will address all the questions. Today a Schlumberger, tomorrow a Shell, day after tomorrow, Reliance. And for someone who does their job well, if you think that at the back end there is actually a person reading your CV, then you have set yourself up for failure. It's like you are in the exam hall and you are asked a question and you read the answers for another one, and after writing a line or two you go into your own answer and you hope to get marks for that. That won't happen. So go through the demands of that particular role and make sure every part of your CV is focused towards a certain, aspiration of that role or not. And be honest. If you have not done it, you have not done it. Don't try to fake it in order to make it, because then you don't come across as authentic. The CV and cover letter tailored to the demands of the role is the first thing that I would say. Now, most of the companies, big companies, which get hundreds of CVs, do the automated system as the first point of screening. So make sure some of the key words mentioned in the job description are present in your initial statement or within your CV, so that these automated systems, you can beat it, because they would have a threshold that if your CV is not returning a number of 70% or 80%, whatever that threshold is, it won't go to the next stage, which is a human being looking at it. So make sure you do that. Now, if you have crossed that first hurdle, the next is to have a compelling story, because this is when somebody is interested to talk to you. If you come across as someone who hasn't done the groundwork, hasn't gone to the Shell website, hasn't gone, spend a few hours on Google trying to find out over the last 3 years what Shell has been doing in India, everything that is there in the public domain, and you actually prepare a script that this is what I have been following the news on. This is how Shell set up their center in Bangalore. Now their center in Chennai. We understand based on what your press releases are. This is what you're working on. You are demonstrating to the recruiter that how switched on you are. Some of it may be wrong information which the recruiter may correct you, but even then you are making a good impression that you have done the groundwork there. So that is something I would say that, you know, um, to work in an organization like Shell, you would have to, or apply for, so sorry, to apply for a role advertised in a company like Shell, you would have to do the groundwork before you get to that point. And in terms of sector, I believe, my personal belief is, in the area of data science, there will be a massive requisition, and the working model that Shell is adopting, a lot of that is going to get done in India. The back end, the analytics part, not the business part. So that is where the roles are going to come. Last but not the least, I would say that, look, do not, it's good to have an idea about where you want to go. That gives you a vision, but don't be fixated, because when you stay fixated, what happens is the opportunities that are closer to you, you fail to recognize them, or you shoo them away. If I thought graduating out in Reliance that that's it, I want to work for Shell. If I can't work for Shell, my life is a loss. Guess what? I would have been a complete, recluse, a waste, a complete cynic. I have worked in companies which had not more than 50 people. I used to work for a company called Geotrace. So everyone think it's going to be like a step ladder, our career, and most of our public sector units are guilty of pervading that idea that you join at this level, then you go this, then you go this, and after 30 years with a nice provident fund, you retire. In the private sector, it doesn't work that way. It is almost like, you are doodling on a sheet. That is how your career grows. So if you stay positive, look out for opportunities, do the right thing, network, and you actually do a good job at the job that you are currently doing, you never know when opportunity comes. And when it comes, you grasp it with both hands. So I joined Shell after 13 years in the industry as a lateral hire, which Shell does very seldom from time to time. They generally hire graduates. So if I couldn't write my script, I don't expect to give advice on people to start writing their scripts. Have an idea, but be flexible.
Very well said. Very well said. I guess most of the people who graduated in 2020 or 21, especially because of the pandemic, what is seeing the crisis and opportunities right now, need to hear this out loud. Well, I am done with my questions. And I don't see any questions from the audience as of now. Anybody who's interested to ask anything, or each of you have all your queries sorted?
Can I say something, Shivangi?
Yeah, sure.
First and foremost, I want to thank everyone who actually, devoted time away from everything that they are doing to actually sit through this. 1 hour could be a long time. So hopefully we kept you, reasonably well informed about, my thoughts, my ideas. But if something comes to your mind, there is this LinkedIn. That's the only thing that I'm on. So, and then Advantage has this LinkedIn where it was advertised. Go there, tag me so that I would get an update on my LinkedIn. If you have any further questions that come to your mind later, once you take all this in, I would be happy to, respond to your queries.
That's very welcoming, sir. Thank you. Habib says, thank you so much for such a wonderful session.
Thank you.
It was indeed a wonderful session. One of the best that I had till now, honestly.
That's very kind. That's very kind of you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Have
And
a wonderful day and God bless
yeah,
all of you. Okay. Bye bye.
thank you. Stay safe, everybody.